Welcome everyone to Caleb Watches Movies, the channel where I, Caleb, randomly select from one of the many movies that I own, and I watch and review them for you, except for days like today, when we look at all of the films that belong to a certain character or a certain genre, and I rank the crap out of them. And that makes sense for today because we are taking a look at all of the films that belong to this character known as Bond. James Bond. Because today finally marks the release of the 25th James Bond film called No Time to Die. It's like 50th delayed release date, of course, due to the whole pandemic situation, which makes sense. I, however, don't feel comfortable enough with going to see the movie to include it on this ranking, so in honor of that movie, we are going to be ranking the previous 24 James Bond films, which 24 films makes it the stupidest idea I've ever had. I think the only other ranking that I've done on this channel so far that has had close to that was the MCU after Spider-Man Far From Home, which I think was 21 films, so that was a dumb idea. This is even dumber. Now, I grew up watching James Bond with my dad. It was always on cable stations anywhere. They always had James Bond marathons every Saturday or Sunday. And I always seemed to catch it when we were in the Roger Moore era of James Bond. So my preferences are probably going to lean more towards Roger Moore, and also because I'm a child of the 90s, the Pierce Brosnan films. But Bond is one of those characters who is timeless. You can kind of take him out of any film and plop him down into any decade and any situation, and we as an audience would just accept, yeah, James Bond is here in this era. I mean, he only made his debut back in the 60s, which would make him like 70 or almost 80 years old now, but you know, we don't care. We just want to see a good spy Bond film. And you've probably heard this before, that he is a product of the time, which is a phrase that is used really for anything that came out long ago that to today's standards would be considered, wow, that is so risque, that is so offensive, that is so wrong. It is partially true. It is a product of the time. It was socially acceptable to say certain things, do certain things, treat a certain gender a certain way. It was acceptable back then. Definitely not to today's standards. Doesn't mean that that time was okay. I mean, it still means that that time sucked, but it was a product of the time. So let's get started. Let's take a look. 24 James Bond films that I had to cram into the last month or so. Again, was freaking stupid. So here we go, starting off with number 24. At the bottom of my list has to be a Timothy Dalton James Bond film called The Living Daylights. One of the few James Bond films that I've actually reviewed on my channel, so if you want to get my full thoughts, go ahead and check that out. But I'm not a big Timothy Dalton fan as James Bond. I think he's very boring. I think he's a good actor. He's a good classically trained Shakespearean actor. Just here, I mean, yes, he's handsome, but he's boring as hell. Only to put him in this movie that is just, it's boring, it's pointless, it's stupid. We get a discount Ivan Drago here, and a lot of the times I'm confused as exactly what's happening. We have a KGB agent who is not a KGB agent, but really is a KGB agent. It's kind of like an Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and the Jonesy guy, he just keeps flip-flopping, and I have no idea who this person is for or what they're against. Plus, it also has a strange opening where James Bond and a couple other agents are doing a training exercise, parachuting, and I'm wondering, what exactly are you training for? And it makes the whole 00 agent program, makes them seem like they're a bunch of idiots because they get caught in like a tree and they're like, blah, blah, don't shoot me, please! The Living Daylights is the worst James Bond film. At number 23 is You Only Live Twice. I respect Sean Connery, I like Sean Connery, but going back and watching these films, again, a product of the time, those movies are just so offensive and it's hard to get behind them. Case in point, the first line of James Bond in this film is, "Why do Japanese girls taste different from all other girls?" Why? And this is one of the craziest, stupidest storylines in a James Bond film where, in order for him to infiltrate the enemy, they need to make James Bond Japanese. If you've never seen this film before, that's literally what happens. They do plastic surgery. It's like that scene in Team America World Police where they're trying to get Gary to look Middle Eastern, so they put all this patchy, crappy work on him. It's basically the same thing here, and it's offensive as shit here. But we do get the appearance of Blofeld, finally. Hey... At number 22 is Diamonds Are Forever. They took a break with Sean Connery for another film that we'll talk about later, and now he's back finally as James Bond, his final outing as James Bond, where he takes on Blofeld again, finally, and kills him. Finally. In my notes here, though, all I have is just overacting in all capital letters. Overacting, overacting, overacting. Oh god, we get better, though. At number 21 is the second ever James Bond film, From Russia with Love. Another Connery film, and I feel like I'm bashing on him as James Bond, and I feel like that's blasphemous because he did pass away, I believe last year, if not 2 years ago, and he is the most iconic James Bond, but when it comes to the James Bond films that he is in, I'm just not the biggest fan of, honestly. If you are, it's totally fine. I mean, no offense, this is just my opinion. But From Russia with Love is pretty damn boring. It feels like they're trying to do, like, Strangers on a Train or North by Northwest. They're trying to make this a Hitchcock film, and it doesn't work. It's just boring. At number 20 comes License to Kill, the only other Tim Dalton film that we need to talk about here. Again, my least favorite James Bond. We do get almost some pretty high stakes with this movie, though. His best friend, Felix, who I guess I never noticed in the whole James Bond lore before, but he's his best friend who is a CIA American agent. He almost gets killed in this movie. Almost. His wife gets killed in the film, though, which is pretty damn sad. But that's why this film is a little bit higher than the other Timothy Dalton film, because this is not about Queen and country. This is personal. His license gets revoked and he is just out for revenge. A lot of literal sexism in here, though. When a woman crosses the bad guy spanks her. Like, literally pulls out his belt and spanks her. And that's normal. This was at the tail end of the 80s, thank God, because I probably would not have liked these movies back then until we got to the 90s where it really kicked off for me. At number 19 is our first one here with Roger Moore, called For Your Eyes Only, where the opening sees Bond kill Blofeld. Again? Unofficially? Maybe? Who knows? My notes say, though, this is the film that takes place in Greece. And I like Greece. I've been to Greece. It's a beautiful place. At least the ancient part is. We get some amazing, brilliant acting, though, from our Bond girl. Bond is trying to fight the bad guy who is the villain from Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. He was also that old guy from Game of Thrones. Bond is talking about how important it is for us to do the thing, because then that'll save the world. And then the Bond girl goes, "More important than the man who killed my parents." Oscar-worthy. I also feel that this was the film in the whole run of Roger Moore Bond movies where we had the sense that, hey, Roger Moore, you're kind of looking a little older for us to be playing Bond, and I think this is the first time that we're like, hey, you're kind of outstaying your welcome here. It's okay, though, he has some great James Bond films under his belt, which we'll talk about here soon. At number 18 is the last of the Pierce Brosnan films, and probably one of the stupidest films on this list, called Die Another Day. Or should I say, Die Another Day. My best Madonna impersonation. Now, Pierce Brosnan is my favorite Bond because he's the Bond that I grew up with in the 90s. And anytime it was announced that, hey, there's another Bond film and he's going to be in it, I was going to be there, opening day, because I love him as James Bond. But the thing about James Bond is that he's a spy. He's not a superhero, and this film tried to make him a superhero because it was around this time when superhero films started being the next big thing at the box office. So they're like, hey, let's have Bond take on a huge-ass satellite with a huge sun laser beam that'll blow up the bombs at the 38th parallel. Oh my god, I just realized that they gave this movie the Batman and Robin ending. This is Mr. Freeze with his ice beam satellite thing, freezing Gotham and the world. Except this isn't Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is, again, literal whitewashing of a Chinese character into a white British man. Bond does Bond. This movie does have Halle Berry in it, though, which is never a bad thing. Ever, ever, ever. At number 17 is A View to a Kill, which I thought was going to end up at the bottom of my list, because I have seen all of these movies before, and just kind of off the top of my head thinking about them, I always thought this one was the worst one, because it had the worst acting. Christopher Walken is doing his walking thing. Whoa, hello, Bond, what? But watching it this time around, I like it a little bit more. And I like the whole horse racing element and the steroid usage, microchip steroid usage for the horse. I mean, we spend a lot of time with the horses, actually. Wow. But you can tell this is when they were trying to make James Bond appeal to a younger crowd, even though they have an older Roger Moore. They were doing like, hey, computers and microchips, what all the young kids are doing. And hey, we'll have Roger Moore, James Bond, he'll snowboard down the mountain, and we'll have some cool Californication song playing in the background, and Brah. It was a desperate attempt, but I ended up liking this movie more. Again, just with the acting, that's pretty terrible. That stayed the same. At number 16 is the very first outing from James Bond called Dr. No, which I remember always not liking this movie as a kid, because compared to the other James Bond films that I would watch, this one was just boring. It was slow, there was no action, he wasn't doing anything, he was kind of just sitting around waiting for people to show up in hotel rooms, which is what you would do as a spy. So watching it this time, I was like, you know what, I like this more. I like it. Plus, it's a nice little vacation that all these actors and producers and directors get to take vacation in Jamaica while making a movie. Why not? But it's because of this movie that this entire franchise exists, and I like it much more. At number 15 is the movie called Thunderball. And the only thing that immediately comes to mind with this film is it's underwater and harpoon guns and shit. And we also have the jetpack opening, which is pretty iconic to James Bond lore. It was pretty frickin' brave of them to put the whole climax underwater, where there is no dialogue and really no sound other than the sound of water being pushed aside and maybe some grunts here and there. But the whole lack of sound, the whole quips and talking back and forth that we typically get from a James Bond film is not here, and I think that's actually pretty commendable, because that's a risk to take in a James Bond movie. And you have a lot of people underwater. I mean, so many things could go wrong. It's actually very impressive, this whole final climax scene. Good job, Thunderball, for taking a risk. At number 14 comes probably the most famous song from the whole James Bond introductory song lore ever, called Live and Let Die, Live and Let Die. The first outing of Roger Moore as James Bond, and he's my second favorite James Bond. You gotta love this guy. Unlike Sean Connery, in my opinion, where those performances, you get the whole sexism and disgusting, misogynistic man-type character. Here with Roger Moore, he's a lot more charming, and I think he understands how to play the comedy of these one-liners a little bit better than Sean Connery. However, that probably just turned off everyone who's watching this list, so bye everybody. Bye. We'll see you next time. Not even make it to halfway on this list. But again, I like Roger Moore more than Sean Connery. And this was the movie that was all voodoo, and my notes here say the message of this movie is that, black people are the bad guys. Every single one. They're all connected to each other. They're all on walkie-talkies. They're all bad. Oh god. The definition of the product of the time period. Wow. And we also have the introduction of that annoying southern cop who showed up in the next film after this, too. I know he's intended to be funny, but gosh, he's just freaking annoying. At number 13 is The Spy Who Loved Me. I mean, they shagged too, baby, yeah! This film had a lot of cool things when we talk about the whole lore of James Bond. We had the underwater submarine car, which was totally badass. James Bond going up against the Russians, which is always a must in the whole James Bond thing. And this was our first time seeing the character of Jaws, who is one of my favorite characters to play as in the whole GoldenEye game, and we'll talk about GoldenEye in a second. But it also has one of the best names for the Bond girl in these movies, the Russian agent, codename Triple X. Need I say more? Halfway through our list, at number 12, is really the forgotten, not talked about Daniel Craig James Bond film called Quantum of Solace. What happens in Quantum of Solace, you ask? The only reason why it's higher on this list is because the misogyny, the sexism that is known with James Bond through the 60s and the 70s is not present here. When I first saw this film many years ago, I commended this movie with James Bond not ending up with the Bond girl in the end, which always happens in a James Bond movie. He drops her off and he drives away. I like that. But Bond is going up against this guy who you'd think he'd be going after oil, but instead he's going after water, and he's gonna buy land that has water, and that's gonna make him a rich man in the world, and that's a problem. It was the follow-up to Casino Royale, so, I mean, no one's touching Casino Royale, so you gotta feel bad for this movie, but it had to happen for us to move on in the whole Daniel Craig lore. I keep saying lore as if these films are like thousands of years old, but you know what? It is lore. It is James Bond lore, damn it. At number 11 is the most recent James Bond film, Spectre, or Spectre, the only film that I had not seen while leading up to this list. And in the first 5 minutes of watching this film, I am pleasantly pleased. There is an incredible, what seems to be one just giant, big, long tracking shot of James Bond in the middle of this parade during the Day of the Dead celebration in Mexico, and he's making his way up to a hotel room, to a roof, where he's going to assassinate someone. That was awesome. The rest of the movie, though, is pretty damn boring. We get the reveal of the new Blofeld in Christoph Waltz, who is a great actor. It's just he has nothing to really do here, only him kind of coming on screen saying, "Haha, Bond, I was behind everything. Haha." And that was it. That's all he did. That's all that really happened. This movie is 2.5 hours long. There is no need for this film to be 2.5 hours. 2 hours max. You could probably make this movie in an hour and a half, actually, because there's just so much of nothing happening. Bond walking from one place to another, or Bond slowly creeping into a house for a very long time before we actually get to some dialogue and things moving the story along. This film needed editing, it needed some cutting, it needed some chopping, because this film overstayed its welcome a lot. It's not a terrible film, but like I said, it's long and boring. Here we are entering the top 10, starting at number 10 with Octopussy. I like Octopussy. There is no way that a film, James Bond, any type of film, would ever be called Octopussy by today's standards. It just wouldn't even be talked about. The fact that this film title actually exists is pretty damn impressive. It's a product of the time. Shockingly, though, I actually really enjoyed this movie. It has a really cool intro at the horse race with Fidel Castro and the plane and blowing up things. It was a really cool open. But Bond needs to go after a ceramic egg and those who want this egg because the egg is important. It's a jewel, and it leads to Russians and bombs. Of course it leads to Russians. It has to lead to Russians. That's just James Bond. Also, Roger Moore in clown makeup defusing a bomb is hilarious. I also love how Octopussy's henchwomen are dressed in the Incredibles outfits, way before the Incredibles was ever conceived. Love it! But the line of the movie that just makes the movie is the discovery of the octopus tattoo, and James Bond saying, "Hey, what's that?" And she just says, "Oh, well, that's my little Octopussy." Again, I like Octopussy. I love that the explanation of the name Octopussy is that it was her father's nickname for her. I would call social services and be like, this dad is calling his daughter Octopussy. I think there's something happening there, and we need to get her out of that household. But Octopussy is better than what I remember. Oh, God. Gotta compose myself now and go on to number 9, which is Moonraker. That's how the Moonraker knows. Bond in space. Of course we gotta take James Bond into space. This was the late 1970s, and there was this big space craze that was happening around where, you know, there was this movie that came out that everyone was talking about, this little indie film called Star Wars, and then everyone was like, hey, we need to do something in space. Studio, go! So let's do Alien, let's bring back the whole Star Trek crew, and we'll do that, and hey, let's take James Bond and shoot him up there. But this one has a special place in my heart because I discovered this on VHS in my dad's collection of just random unmarked films in the basement. Plugging it in, and then out of nowhere, I'm like, oh my god, this is a James Bond movie. Cool! And we get a second appearance from Jaws. We have a villain who is seen playing a masterful piano piece just by doing this on the piano. I love it. And we have one of the best ending lines to a James Bond film ever, when Bond and Dr. Goodhead are up in space, and MI6 is trying to make contact, and Q looks at the monitor and says, oh, I think he's attempting re-entry, sir. Oh, the cheesy, silly, stupid James Bond movies. You gotta love them. At number 8 is The Man with the Golden Gun, which is the must-have in the game GoldenEye, because it takes one shot to kill your opponent. But in the film, this golden gun is just this little stupid-looking dinky thing. But in the game, you shoot the golden gun and it kills him right away, even though in life it's like, well, you know, a bullet would just kill anyone. Doesn't make the golden gun that much more effective. Or I guess maybe it does. They tried to explain it in this film, but my brain just couldn't wrap around it. But we get an awesome villain with Christopher Lee, the man with the 3 nipples. This movie did bring back the stupid redneck sheriff, though, from Live and Let Die, which I guess it's better in this movie than the first one, because he's just even dumber. But I also like this movie and commend this movie because this is the first one in the whole James Bond franchise to actually showcase women kicking ass and taking names. Up until this point, every woman that was in this movie was always like, oh, James, I can't do anything for myself or by myself. You've got to do it because you're James Bond. You're a man. Here, finally, they put these martial arts twins and they take out everyone. And I was like, thank you. We actually have women who are kicking ass in this franchise. Finally. The Man with the Golden Gun. I was shocked that it made it this high, but it absolutely deserves to be up here. At number 7 is probably one of the least talked about films of the Pierce Brosnan era, The World Is Not Enough. However, I do recall really enjoying this film. I saw it in the theaters opening day, and when I went home, I was like, wow, that's my favorite Bond film. This was awesome. Watching it, though, this time, it was kind of boring and not a lot happening, but we still get that great charm that Pierce Brosnan had as James Bond. There are bombs aplenty in this movie, though. Bomb here, bomb in that scene, bomb in this scene. Bombs everywhere. And one of the funniest casting decisions ever, putting Denise Richards as a nuclear physicist. Thank you. This gives me confidence if we're putting people like Denise Richards in that role. You know, it makes me feel good that nothing bad is going to happen in this world. At number 6, and this is probably going to give a lot of controversy here, but here it is at number 6, Skyfall. Hit the skyfall and sick from me, and it's a hurry. Whatever the lyrics are, I can never understand Adele in anything that she does. But this film to me suffered from the idea of overhyping a movie. This film was hailed as, it's the best Bond film ever, it's the best story ever, Daniel Craig gives an amazing performance, this is the best thing to ever happen this year in movies. And it's a good film, it's a good emotional piece, and the climax is unlike a James Bond movie. It's very personal, it's very internalized. It's just, again, it was overhyped for me. In the opening, we seemingly see James Bond die, get shot, and then we see him kind of roaming the world because he feels like the company abandoned him, but then all of a sudden he just comes back. Cool. But it does deserve to be this high on the list because, again, it is an emotional story, something that we don't get from James Bond films, so I appreciate that. And that's really what the Daniel Craig movies do, is they give some depth and emotion to this character, as opposed to just being this suave, charming, line-delivering guy. At number 5 is the movie that was really ahead of its time, Tomorrow Never Dies. So the USSR recently went out of power, it's not the USSR anymore. All of a sudden James Bond has no one to fight because he's always fighting the Russians. What is he gonna do now? In this film, he's going to take on really the biggest superpower in the entire world before it was even the most powerful thing in the world with the rise of social media. Just media. If you control the media, if you control TV, newspapers, magazines, postings online, that was brand new at the time. If this film would have been made like 10 years later, this film would have been incredible and would have been hailed as one of the best. Because controlling social media that a lot of people have just as a part of themselves now in their everyday life is one of the most powerful things in the world. And if you can control that narrative, you can control anything. And that's what this movie does. Tomorrow Never Dies is not talked about enough in the whole James Bond franchise, and it deserves to be. Plus, we get a great remote control car chase scene, which I always remember and always love. This film is awesome. At number 4, it's the most iconic of all the Sean Connery James Bond films, Goldfinger. No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. James Bond is not going after Spectre, he's not going after the Russians, he's just going after this big wealthy billionaire, and you see gold everywhere, a man obsessed with gold. This is the best Sean Connery Bond and the most iconic. Plus one of the best Bond girl names ever with pussy galore. But we have the ejector seat, the laser that's about to cut James Bond in half, and we get that iconic line. This film was one of my favorites growing up. The dead body painted in gold and suffocated because of it. This film is one of the best James Bond films, rightfully so. At number 3 is the forgotten James Bond film On Her Majesty's Secret Service. George Lazenby is a great James Bond. I'm putting my foot down. He is great. This story is great. This was the first time that we got to see an emotional James Bond story. He actually gets married in this film and loses his wife, and that affects him throughout the entire rest of the franchise. It's very 60s though. Like 60s all over the place. Costuming, the lighting styles, the ADR, very, very 60s. But this James Bond was the first one that we saw that was actually combative. He could fight, and he can do cool parkour and flips and stuff. But he's still very cheeky and very charming. He even has a couple of lines in here where he's like, wow, this stuff never happens to the other guy. And giving a little wink to the camera as in like, yeah, I'm here, Sean Connery's not. Get over it. On Her Majesty's Secret Service, one of the best Bond films, the forgotten James Bond film that no one talks about, no one ever plays it on TV. This film is one of the best. At number 2 is a very close call for number 1, because it's this movie that sparked a game that started a whole revolution of first-person shooter games, GoldenEye. GoldenEye. I found his weakness. The introduction of James Bond to the 90s, our first appearance of Pierce Brosnan. This was my James Bond. This was the James Bond that I looked forward to at the movie theaters, on TV. The opening of this movie is fantastic. He rides the motorcycle off a cliff to get into a plane to lift himself up. One of the best stunts I've ever seen. Plus, you also got Sean Bean in here, and, you know, he's a villain, or he's gonna die in every movie, so I think that was my first introduction to Sean Bean, actually. And Famke Jenkins is here, who is a villain who kills her victims by sleeping with them and wrapping her legs around them, which, as a young boy watching this, I liked it a lot. And it gave birth to one of the best games ever created in GoldenEye. I would play it all the time with my brothers, with my friends, and it's with that platform that sparked this whole generation of first-person shooter games. We wouldn't have games like Halo today without this movie sparking the James Bond N64 video game. This movie is important, and it's one of the best. It is not better, though, than our number 1 pick, Casino Royale. James Bond for the new millennia, Daniel Craig's first appearance, a blonde James Bond, which we got over very quickly because this James Bond is the baddest ass of all the James Bonds. He's parkouring up cranes and buildings and shit. Plus the fight choreography in here is brutal, it is physical, it feels real, this guy is awesome, and this film was capitalizing on the whole poker craze that was hitting mainstream audiences around that time in 2006. Everyone was playing Texas Hold'em. And it's also topped off with a very emotional ending where James Bond loses someone that he loves, something that we don't typically see in a James Bond film, but this film had everything that we ever wanted from James Bond. Why not have that in here? This film had everything. This James Bond film is great. The poker game is great. This film is great from start to finish. It is thrilling from start to finish. It is by far the best James Bond film. And there it is. I have talked for a very long time about this character, James Bond, that has been here ever since the 60s. For several decades, he has stood the test of time. He has been plopped out of one generation into another, into another. He is timeless. He is going to be here for a very long time to come. So guys, what did you think of my list of all the James Bond films? What does your list of James Bond films look like? Please post below. I definitely want to see where my list compares to your list. And as always, if you like what you see here, if you like my take on movies, then hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that bell. See you all the next time I release my next movie review. So guys, I will see you next time on the channel, but in the meantime, be well, be good to each other, and go watch a movie. Take care, guys.